The galaxy had a rule about Earth. Everyone knew it. Everyone followed it. The rule was simple: stay away from the Death World. Ambassador Kethrix remembered the first time he learned about humans. He was just a young student then, sitting in a classroom on his homeworld. His teacher had shown them images of Earth, and the entire class had frozen in horror. Earth was a nightmare. The planet had massive oceans filled with creatures that could swallow ships whole. It had mountains that touched the clouds and deserts that could cook you alive. The gravity was so strong that most species could barely stand on its surface. Storms ripped across its lands with enough force to destroy cities. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, life was trying to kill other life. From this hellish world came the humans. They were strange creatures. They walked on two legs, had soft skin, and lived for less than 100 years. They should have been weak. They should have died out long ago. But instead, they had conquered their planet, survived every disaster nature threw at them, and then reached for the stars. The Galactic Concord had made a decision 300 cycles ago. Humanity was too dangerous to be allowed to spread, but they were also too dangerous to attack directly. So the Concord offered them a deal. Humans could keep their home system, they could have their one little corner of the galaxy, but they could never leave. The humans had agreed. They smiled and nodded and signed the treaties. And then they went quiet. For 300 years, the galaxy exhaled in relief. The Deathworlders stayed in their cage. The universe was safe. Kethrix thought about all of this as he stared at the report on his screen. His antennae trembled. His forearms gripped the edges of his desk because something had just happened that changed everything. A signal had come from the Shroud. The Shroud was the most terrifying region in known space. It was controlled by the Harvesters, an ancient empire that fed on other species. They took entire civilizations, transported them to their dark worlds, and kept them alive for centuries. They drained them slowly, harvesting chemicals and compounds from their living bodies. No one who entered the Shroud ever came back. No one ever sent messages out. Until tonight. The signal was weak and old. It had traveled through space for what seemed like forever. The Concord's translation systems could not understand it. The language was unknown. The format ancient. Most officials wanted to ignore it. It was probably just noise, they said. Space was full of strange signals. But then Earth's listening station Omega picked up the same signal. Lieutenant Yara Chen was working the night shift when her console started beeping. She was 26 years old, born on Mars, trained on Earth. She had spent 2 years listening to the silence of space, cataloging distant stars and tracking asteroids. Nothing exciting ever happened on the night shift. The beeping changed that. Yara leaned forward and studied the signal. It was definitely artificial. Someone had sent this on purpose. She ran it through the standard translation software, but nothing came back. The computer did not recognize the language, but Yara did. Her grandmother had taught her Cantonese when she was a little girl. It was an old Earth language, one that most people had forgotten. But Yara's family had kept it alive, passing it down through generations like a precious gift. The signal was in Cantonese. Old Cantonese, the kind spoken 300 years ago. Yara's hands shook as she translated the message. Word by word, the horror became clear. They took us from our ship. They keep us in tanks. They drain us but do not let us die. We have been here so long. Our children have never seen the sun. Please, anyone, help us. Yara checked the signal's origin. It came from deep within the Shroud, from a region called Shroud 7th. She checked the historical records next. Her blood turned cold. 312 years ago, before the quarantine, a colony ship called the Jade Phoenix had left Earth. It carried 10,000 people, all hoping to find a new home among the stars. The ship had vanished without a trace. Everyone assumed it had been destroyed. Everyone had mourned and moved on. But the Jade Phoenix had not been destroyed. It had been taken. For 300 years, humans had been held in the Shroud. For 300 years, they had been harvested like animals, and for 300 years, nobody had come to save them. Yara sent her report up the chain of command. She expected it to take days to reach anyone important. She was wrong. 6 hours later, every admiral in the human navy was awake and gathered in a secure room on Earth. They watched the translated message play on a large screen. They listened to the voice of a man who had been dead for centuries, begging for rescue. Grand Admiral Oren Vasquez was 63 years old. She had spent her entire life preparing for a war that everyone told her would never come. She had built ships in secret, trained soldiers in hidden bases, and waited for the day when humanity would need to fight. That day had arrived. "The Concord will not help us," one of her officers said. "They have agreements with the harvesters. They will tell us to stay in our system and forget about this." Admiral Vasquez stood up. Her eyes were hard as stone. "Then we do not ask the Concord for permission. The quarantine was meant to keep us contained," she interrupted. "It was meant to make us forget that we are human. But we do not forget. We do not abandon our people, not ever." She looked around the room at the faces of her officers. These were men and women who had trained their whole lives for this moment. They knew what crossing the border meant. They knew the galaxy would call them monsters. They did not care. "Prepare the first expeditionary fleet," Admiral Vasquez ordered. "Every ship, every soldier, every weapon we have built in secret. We move in 12 hours. "And if the Concord tries to stop us?" The Admiral smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Let them try." 12 hours later, the quarantine boundary shattered like glass. 400 warships crossed into forbidden space, their engines burning bright against the darkness. The galaxy watched in shock as the Deathworlders broke free from their cage. On 100 different worlds, diplomats scrambled to understand what was happening. On 1,000 space stations, traders and travelers stared at their screens in disbelief. The Concord sent frantic messages demanding an explanation. Humanity sent back only one reply. "Our people are in the shroud. We are coming to get them. Anyone who stands in our way will regret it." The message spread across the galaxy like wildfire. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the harvesters felt something they had never experienced before. The Galactic Concord had always watched Earth. They used spy satellites, long-range sensors, and paid informants. They counted every ship humanity built. They tracked every rocket launch. They believed they knew exactly what the Deathworlders were capable of. They were completely wrong. Ambassador Kethrix stood on the observation deck of the UES Defiance, humanity's flagship. He had been invited aboard as an observer, though he understood that he was really a hostage. The humans were polite about it, but they were also very clear. He would watch what happened next. He would report it to the Concord, and the Concord would learn to never underestimate humanity again. Through the viewing window, Kethrix could see the rest of the fleet. 400 warships stretched out behind the Defiance like a river of steel and fire. Each one was massive, bristling with weapons and covered in thick armor plating. They were nothing like the elegant, delicate ships the Concord built. These were ships designed for one purpose: war. "How?" Kethrix finally managed to ask. His chromatophores, the color-changing cells in his skin, kept shifting to panic violet. He could not control them. "How did you build all of this? Our sensors watched your system constantly. We would have seen construction on this scale." Admiral Vasquez stood beside him, her hands clasped behind her back. She was a tall woman with gray hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. When she spoke, her voice was calm and steady, like a frozen lake. "You watched our planets," she said. "You watched our moons. But you did not watch the places where no one should be able to survive." She gestured toward the fleet. Those ships were built inside asteroids, deep in the hearts of rocks that your sensors could not penetrate. Some were constructed in the crushing pressure of gas-giant atmospheres. Others were assembled in the freezing darkness between stars, where your spy satellites never thought to look. Kethrix felt dizzy. The humans had been building a secret navy for 300 years, right under the Concord's nose. Right under everyone's nose. "This is a violation of the Accords," he said weakly. "The Concord will respond. They will punish humanity for this." Admiral Vasquez turned to look at him. Her expression did not change, but something in her eyes made Kethrix step backward. "Ambassador," she said slowly, "the Concord told us to stay in our cage while our people were being eaten alive. Your precious Accords mean nothing to us. If the Concord wants to punish humanity, they are welcome to try. After we finish with the harvesters, they can take a number and wait in line." She turned back to the window. "But I suspect they will be too busy watching what happens next." Across the fleet, humans prepared for battle. In the ship's massive hangar bays, pilots ran final checks on their fighters. These small, nimble craft were designed to fly through debris fields and asteroid belts at speeds that would kill most species. Human reflexes, sharpened by millions of years of evolution on a world that was constantly trying to murder them, made them the deadliest pilots in the galaxy. In the barracks, Marines loaded their weapons and checked their armor. These soldiers had trained in Earth's crushing gravity, building muscles and bones that were far stronger than they should be. They had practiced fighting in every environment imaginable: burning deserts, frozen wastelands, underwater caves, and the vacuum of space. They were ready for anything. In the medical bays, doctors and nurses prepared for the wounded. Human medicine was terrifyingly advanced because it had to be. On Earth, everything was poisonous, infectious, or trying to eat you. Humans had learned to heal injuries that would kill other species. They had learned to keep fighting long after their bodies should have given up. Captain Marcus Stone walked through the corridors of the Defiance, checking on his soldiers. He was a big man with dark skin and scars on his hands. He had grown up in the slums of New Lagos, fought his way into the military, and earned his rank through blood and sweat. His soldiers loved him because he never asked them to do anything he would not do himself. "How are we feeling?" he asked a group of young Marines who were gathered around a table, cleaning their rifles. "Ready, sir?" one of them said. She was barely 20 years old with red hair and freckles. Her name was Private Chen, and she was Lieutenant Yara Chen's younger sister. When she learned that her ancestors might still be alive in the shroud, she had immediately volunteered for the rescue mission. "Good," Captain Stone said. "Remember your training. Remember why we are here. Those people in the shroud have been waiting 300 years for someone to save them. We are not going to let them down." The young Marines nodded. Their eyes were hard with determination. In the command center, Admiral Vasquez studied the tactical displays. The harvesters knew they were coming. That was not a surprise. A fleet this large could not move through space without being detected. The enemy had gathered their own forces at the edge of the shroud, a massive armada of 1,200 capital ships. "They outnumber us 3-1, her tactical officer reported. "Their technology is at least 1,000 years more advanced than ours. Their ships are faster, their weapons have longer range, and their shields are stronger." Admiral Vasquez nodded slowly. "And what advantages do we have?" The tactical officer hesitated. "None, Admiral. By every logical calculation, we should retreat and find another way." The Admiral smiled. It was the smile of a wolf looking at a flock of sheep. "You forgot one advantage, Commander. We are human." She turned to address the entire command center. Every officer stopped what they were doing and looked at her. "The harvesters have ruled the shroud for 10,000 years, she said. "They have crushed dozens of species, devoured entire civilizations, and never faced a real challenge. They have forgotten what it means to fight someone who will not give up. They have forgotten what it means to face an enemy who would rather die than surrender. She pointed at the display showing the Harvester Armada. Those creatures think this is going to be easy. They think we will behave like the other species they have conquered. They think we will calculate the odds, realize we cannot win, and run away. Her voice dropped to a cold whisper. They are about to learn why the galaxy is afraid of us. The fleet crossed the final distance to the shroud's edge. Ahead of them, the Harvester Armada waited in perfect formation. Their ships were strange and organic, like massive insects floating in space. They pulsed with dark energy, hungry and patient. A communication came through from the Harvester Overmind. It was not words exactly, more like thoughts pressed directly into the minds of everyone who heard it. "Turn back, little creatures. You cannot win. Surrender now and your deaths will be quick." Admiral Vasquez opened a reply channel. Her voice was broadcast to every ship in both fleets. "This is Grand Admiral Oren Vasquez of the United Earth Navy. You are holding our people against their will. You have tortured them for 300 years. Release them now, and we might let some of you live." There was a long pause. Then the Overmind's response came, dripping with ancient contempt. "You are insects. We have consumed empires. You are nothing." Admiral Vasquez cut the communication. She turned to her weapons officer. "All ships," she said calmly. "Open fire." The Battle of the Shroud had begun. The Harvester Overmind had consumed countless civilizations. It had absorbed the knowledge and memories of billions of beings over 10,000 years. It knew how wars were fought. It knew how inferior species behaved when faced with overwhelming force. They retreated. They calculated. They looked for escape routes. They tried to minimize their losses. The humans did none of these things. The first wave of Terran ships did not slow down as they approached the Harvester line. They did not spread out to minimize damage. They did not take defensive positions and trade careful shots from a safe distance. They charged. The Overmind felt something strange ripple through its ancient consciousness. This was not how space battles worked. This was suicide. But the humans kept coming. The UES Fury, a heavy cruiser with a crew of 800, aimed directly at the heart of a Harvester dreadnought. It was one of the largest enemy ships, a massive organic thing that pulsed with dark hunger. The Fury's shields were failing. Its hull was being ripped apart by enemy fire. Any rational species would have pulled back. Captain Helena Kowalski gripped the arms of her command chair and stared at the enemy ship growing larger in her view screen. Her face was bloody from a wound on her forehead, but her eyes were clear and focused. "All hands prepare for emergency evacuation," she announced calmly. "You have 30 seconds to reach the escape pods. It has been an honor serving with you." She did not leave her chair. Someone had to keep the ship on course. 800 crew members ejected from the Fury in small pods, scattering into space like seeds from a dying flower. 3 seconds later, the Fury struck the Harvester dreadnought at full speed. The explosion was visible from 100 kilometers away. When the light faded, both ships were gone, reduced to expanding clouds of debris. The Overmind paused. One human ship had just sacrificed itself to destroy one of its largest vessels. The exchange seemed equal, almost favorable to the Harvesters. Then it happened again, and again, and again. Across the battle line, human ships were ramming Harvester vessels. They were not doing it randomly. They were targeting command ships, supply vessels, and communication nodes. They were tearing holes in the Harvester formation with their own bodies. "What are they doing?" the Overmind screamed across its network. "This is insane! This is waste! This is—" It had no word for what this was. In 10,000 years, it had never seen anything like it. On the bridge of the Defiance, Admiral Vasquez watched the battle unfold on her tactical display. Every ramming attack had been volunteered. No one had been ordered to die. They had simply looked at the situation, realized what needed to be done, and done it. "Enemy formation is breaking," her tactical officer reported. "They did not expect this. They are confused." "All assault teams," the admiral ordered, "begin boarding operations." Throughout the fleet, hundreds of small ships launched toward the harvester vessels. They were loaded with Marines in powered armor, humans who were about to do something that no other species had ever attempted: fight the harvesters hand to hand. Captain Marcus Stone was in the first wave. His dropship punched through the organic hull of a harvester cruiser, and he led his squad into the dark corridors beyond. The inside of the ship was like a nightmare. The walls were made of something that looked like flesh. Strange liquids dripped from the ceiling. The air smelled like death, and everywhere the harvesters waited. They were horrible creatures. Their bodies were thin and long, with too many limbs and mouths full of needle teeth. They moved with a jerky, unnatural speed, climbing on walls and ceilings like giant insects. A normal soldier would have frozen in terror. Captain Stone opened fire. His rifle spat energy bolts into the closest harvester, burning holes through its body. The creature screamed and died. Two more took its place, leaping toward him with claws extended. Stone dropped one with a headshot, then caught the other by the throat with his armored hand. He slammed it against the wall hard enough to crack the organic surface, then crushed its neck. Behind him, his squad was fighting just as hard. Private Chen, the young Marine with red hair, was spraying fire down a corridor while backing up step by step. Sergeant Williams was using his combat knife to cut through a harvester that had gotten too close. Corporal Okonkwo had run out of ammunition and was beating a creature to death with his empty rifle. It was brutal. It was savage. It was everything the galaxy feared about humanity. And it was working. Across the battle, similar scenes played out on dozens of harvester ships. Human Marines were fighting through corridors, capturing engine rooms, and destroying critical systems. They took terrible casualties, but they did not stop. They could not stop. Because somewhere ahead of them, their people were waiting to be rescued. The Overmind tried to understand what was happening. Its calculations showed that the humans were losing. They had lost over 100 ships. Their casualties were climbing rapidly. By any logical measure, they should surrender and negotiate, but they kept fighting. The UES Remember Shanghai was a small destroyer with a crew of just 200. When a breach in the battle line threatened to let harvester ships through to attack the support vessels, the Shanghai moved to block the gap. For 6 hours, that tiny ship held the line. Enemy fire tore it apart piece by piece. Its shields failed in the first hour. Its weapons went offline in the third. By the 5th hour, only 47 crew members were still alive, fighting fires and patching holes with their bare hands. Commander Sarah Oyalaran, the ship's captain, sent one final message to the fleet. "Shanghai will hold. Get our people out. Do not wait for us." When the Shanghai finally exploded, the gap was sealed. A full division of harvester ships had been destroyed trying to break through. The 47 volunteers had known they were going to die, and they had volunteered anyway. On Shroud 7th, the planet where the colony ship descendants were being held, the first rescue teams were landing. They fought through harvester defenders, smashed through security doors, and finally reached the harvesting facilities. What they found there would haunt them forever. Rows upon rows of tanks stretched into the darkness, each one containing a living being suspended in murky liquid. Tubes ran from their bodies, slowly draining them of fluids. Some had been there for decades. Some had been there for centuries. They were kept alive by harvester technology, unable to die, unable to escape. And many of them were human. Captain Stone found an old man in one of the tanks. His skin was pale as paper, his body thin as bones. But his eyes were open, and when he saw Stone's human face, tears began to flow down his cheeks. "You came," the old man whispered through the tank's speaker. "You actually came." Stone placed his hand on the glass. His own eyes were wet. "We came. We are getting you out of here. All of you." Across the facility, Marines began the long process of freeing the captives. It would take hours. It would take days. But humanity would not leave until every single prisoner was rescued. The Overmind watched all of this through its dying network. It watched its ships burn, its soldiers fall, and its prisoners escape. It watched a species it had dismissed as primitive and weak tear apart everything it had built over 10,000 years. For the first time in its ancient existence, the Overmind understood why the galaxy called them Deathworlders. It was not because they came from a deadly planet. It was because they carried that deadliness with them wherever they went. And now, the Harvesters were learning what it meant to be their prey. The Harvester Overmind was dying, and it knew it. Across the shroud, its network was falling apart. Communication nodes were being destroyed. Vital ship cores were going dark. The unified consciousness that had ruled this region for 10,000 years was fragmenting into isolated, terrified pieces. It should not have been possible. The Overmind had calculated every variable. It had accounted for technology, numbers, tactics, and resources. By every measure, the humans should have lost. But the Overmind had not calculated for madness. It had not calculated for a species that simply refused to accept defeat. It had not calculated for fury. On the surface of Shroud 7th, the liberation was continuing. Marine companies were pushing through the harvesting facilities, freeing prisoners one tank at a time. Medics were working around the clock, treating people who had spent centuries as living resources. Captain Diego Reyes led his squad through the deepest levels of the facility. They had already freed hundreds of captives, but the intelligence reports said there were more, always more. The Harvesters had been collecting sentient beings for millennia. The true scale of the horror was only beginning to become clear. "Captain," one of his soldiers called out, "you need to see this." Reyes followed the voice to a smaller chamber off the main corridor. This section looked different from the others. The tanks here were smaller, the equipment seemed newer, and the beings inside. Reyes felt his heart freeze in his chest. They were children. Rows of tanks held young beings of various species. Some were Valani, their small antennae floating limply in the liquid. Some were from species Reyes did not recognize, and some, in a section near the back, were human. He walked toward them as if in a dream. The children floated in their tanks, eyes closed, tubes running from their thin bodies. They had been born here, in this nightmare place. They had never known anything else. One tank held a girl who looked about 7 years old. She had black hair and delicate features that reminded Reyes of his own daughter, a daughter who was safe at home on Earth, who had never known anything but sunshine and laughter. This child had known only darkness. As Reyes approached, the girl's eyes opened. They were brown, like deep pools of sadness. She looked at him through the glass, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then her lips formed a single word that the tank's external speaker picked up. "Real?" Reyes did not trust his voice. He reached up and removed his helmet, letting the girl see his face. His cheeks were wet with tears he had not realized he was crying. "Yeah, kid," he managed to say. "I am real, and I am taking you home." He turned to his squad. "Get these tanks open, all of them, every single one. I do not care how long it takes or what it costs. These children are leaving this place today." His soldiers did not hesitate. They began working immediately, carefully disconnecting the tubes and opening the tanks. The children were confused and scared, but the Marines were gentle with them. They wrapped them in blankets, held them close, and whispered promises that everything was going to be okay. Similar scenes were happening throughout the facility. Humans were rescuing not just other humans, but every prisoner they found. Valani traders who had been taken centuries ago. Kethric's merchants, who had vanished on routine voyages, species the Galactic Concord had written off as acceptable losses. The humans saved them all. Ambassador Kethrix watched from the command center of the Defiance as reports flowed in from the surface teams. He had spent his entire career studying humans from a distance, trying to understand why the galaxy feared them so much. Now he was finally beginning to comprehend. It was not their strength, though they were strong. It was not their technology, though they were clever. It was not even their willingness to die, though they seemed almost eager to sacrifice themselves. It was something simpler and far more terrifying. Humans bonded. They formed attachments to things, to people, to ideas, to complete strangers from other species. They looked at the universe and saw not resources to be used, but connections to be made. They adopted alien creatures as pets. They wept at the deaths of beings utterly unlike themselves. They traveled across the galaxy to save people they had never met. And once they bonded with something, they would burn the stars themselves to protect it. Admiral Vasquez stood beside Kethrix, watching the same reports. Her face was hard, but her eyes showed something that might have been grief. "We have lost many ships," Kethrix said quietly. "Many soldiers. Was it worth it?" The Admiral did not look at him. "Ask me again in 50 years, when the children we saved today have lived full lives. Ask their children and their children's children. Ask the generations that will exist because we did not abandon them." She finally turned to face him. "Your Concord calculated that those people were acceptable losses. You decided they were not worth saving. We decided differently. But the cost is what makes it matter." Vasquez's voice was steady. "Anyone can do the easy things, the cheap things, the things that cost nothing. Humanity became what it is by doing the hard things, by sacrificing everything for what we believe is right." She looked back at the tactical display, where the last harvester ships were being systematically destroyed. "The galaxy thinks we are monsters because we are willing to die. They do not understand that we are willing to die because we love. We love our families, our friends, our comrades. We love the idea of a universe where children do not grow up in tanks, where innocent beings are not harvested like crops." Her voice dropped. "And we will destroy anything that threatens what we love." On the surface, Captain Reyes was carrying the 7-year-old girl toward a rescue shuttle. She clung to his neck, her small arms barely reaching around his armored shoulders. She had not stopped crying since he freed her from the tank, but she had also not let go of him. "What is your name?" he asked her gently. She was quiet for a moment. "They did not give us names. They called us numbers." Reyes felt something crack inside his heart. "Well, that is over now. From this moment on, you are May. It was my mother's name. It means beautiful." The girl, May, looked up at him with wondering eyes. "I am May?" "Yes, you are May, and you are free, and you are going to see the sun for the first time very soon. Would you like that?" May nodded slowly. A tiny smile appeared on her face. It was the first time she had ever smiled. Across the battlefield, the Harvester Overmind's consciousness was failing. Its vast network had been reduced to scattered islands of awareness, each one shrinking as human forces closed in. In its final moments, it tried to understand where it had gone wrong. It had calculated everything. It had planned for every logical variable, but it had not planned for beings who loved so fiercely that they would cross a galaxy to save strangers. It had not planned for a species that measured value not in resources or power, but in connections. It had not planned for humans. As the last core of its consciousness went dark, the Overmind sent one final message across the dying network. "Remember what they are. Remember what they do to those who threaten what they love. Remember the Deathworlders." But there was no one left to hear it. On the Defiance, Admiral Vasquez received word that the final Harvester command ship had been destroyed. The battle was over. They had won. She allowed herself one moment of grief for the ships and soldiers they had lost. Then she straightened her shoulders and gave her next order. Begin full evacuation of all prisoners. Send word to Earth. Tell them to prepare. Our people are coming home. Across the fleet, cheers erupted. Soldiers embraced each other. Medics wept with relief. And in the cargo bays of every ship, the rescued prisoners looked out at the stars for the first time in centuries. They were going home. The Harvester Overmind died screaming. It had no throat, no lungs, no physical form that could produce sound. But as its consciousness fragmented across 1,000 dying nodes, it broadcast its death across every frequency in the region. Every species with receivers heard it. Every listening post recorded it. The galaxy heard an ancient god beg for mercy as it was systematically erased from existence. The humans offered none. Admiral Vasquez had given simple orders: no survivors, not because humanity was cruel, but because they understood something that the softer species of the galaxy had forgotten. Some evils, if allowed to survive, would simply grow back. The Harvesters had built their empire on suffering. They had refined cruelty into an art form. Given time, they would return. So humanity made sure they had no time. Every Harvester ship was hunted down. Every station was destroyed. Every record of their existence was erased from the systems they had corrupted. The process took 3 weeks. It was thorough, methodical, and absolute. When it was finished, the shroud was empty. The region that had been a graveyard for civilizations became nothing more than ordinary space, waiting to be reclaimed by life. The Galactic Concord watched all of this in silence. They had sent observers. They had recorded everything. They had seen humans fight with a ferocity that defied comprehension, sacrifice themselves without hesitation, and show mercy to every prisoner while showing none to their captors. They did not know what to make of it. Ambassador Kethrix returned to Concord space with his report. He stood before the assembled representatives of 1,000 species and told them what he had seen. When he finished, the great chamber was silent. "They could conquer us," one representative finally said. "After what we saw, they could take whatever they wanted. Why do they not?" Kethrix thought carefully before answering. "I asked Admiral Vasquez the same question. She said humanity does not want to rule. They never did. Then what do they want? They want to be left alone. They want their children to be safe. They want to build and grow and explore." Kethrix paused. "But she also gave me a warning. She said that if anything, anywhere in this galaxy, ever threatens what they love again, they will not stop at the shroud." The chamber erupted in worried murmurs. Representatives turned to each other, their translators struggling to keep up with the overlapping conversations. But Kethrix was not finished. "There is something else you should understand," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "When the humans rescued the prisoners from the shroud, they did not only save their own people, they saved everyone. Villani, Kethrix, species we had never heard of. They carried them to safety, treated their wounds, and promised them new homes." He looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives. They did not ask for payment. They did not demand treaties or concessions. They simply saw beings who were suffering and chose to help them. One of the elder representatives, a being with scales of deep blue, leaned forward. "You are saying they are kind?" Kethrix shook his head. "No. I am saying they are human. They are capable of terrible violence and tremendous compassion, sometimes in the same moment. They will destroy an empire to save a child, and then weep for the lives they had to take." He rose to his full height. "The question is not whether we should fear them. Of course, we should fear them. The question is whether we want them as enemies or as friends." The Concord debated for 6 cycles. Arguments went back and forth. Some species wanted to punish humanity for violating the quarantine. Others wanted to pretend nothing had happened. A few wanted to form an alliance. In the end, wisdom won. The quarantine accords were repealed. Humanity was granted full standing in the galactic community, with all the rights and responsibilities that came with it. Trade routes were opened. Diplomatic channels were established. For the first time in 300 years, human ships could travel freely among the stars. But everyone noticed something interesting about those ships. They were not warships. They were cargo vessels, exploration craft, and passenger transports. The vast fleet that had destroyed the harvesters had simply vanished back into the hidden places where it had been built. The humans had returned to their normal lives. On Earth, the survivors of the Shroud were adjusting to their new world. It was not easy. Many had spent centuries in captivity. They had lost everything they once knew. The descendants of the original colonists had never seen a sun, never felt wind on their faces, never known what it meant to be free. But humans were patient. They built special communities where the survivors could learn to live again. They assigned counselors and therapists to help with the trauma. They gave them time to heal. May, the little girl that Captain Reyes had rescued, was learning to smile. She lived with Reyes and his family now, officially adopted as his daughter. The first time she felt rain on her skin, she had cried for an hour, but they were happy tears. "It is wet," she kept saying. "It is falling from the sky. How?" Reyes had laughed and picked her up, spinning her around in the rain. "It is called weather, little one. Earth has lots of it. You will see much more soon." May had looked up at the gray clouds, the water running down her face, and smiled the biggest smile of her young life. "I like weather." Across the galaxy, stories about the Shroud War spread. They were told in trade ports and diplomatic chambers, in schools and homes and places of worship. The details sometimes changed, but the core remained the same. The Deathworlders had come for their people, and nothing in the universe had been able to stop them. 50 years later, Ambassador Kethrix was very old. His antennae had faded to gray, and his movements were slow and careful, but his mind was still sharp, and his memories were clear. His granddaughter sat beside him, her young chromatophores flickering with curiosity. She had asked him to tell her about the humans again. She never got tired of the story. "They came from a world that tried to kill them every day," Kethrix said, his voice soft with age. "Every animal, every plant, every weather pattern was dangerous. They should have died out long ago, but instead, they became strong." "Are they monsters?" his granddaughter asked. Kethrix considered the question. "In a way, they are capable of things that would terrify you. I watched them destroy an empire in 3 weeks. I saw them sacrifice themselves without hesitation. I watched them crush their enemies with absolute ruthlessness." He paused, remembering the face of a little human girl being carried to safety by a soldier who was weeping. "But I also saw them carry children to safety. I saw them treat wounded strangers as if they were family. I saw them cry for beings they had never met." He looked at his granddaughter with old, wise eyes. "They are not monsters, little one. They are something else entirely." "What should I think of them?" "You should think of them as complicated. Like fire, they can warm you or burn you. It all depends on how you treat them." The young Villani thought about this. "Should we be afraid of them?" Kethrix smiled. "That is the wrong question. You should never be afraid of humans. They are loyal friends, generous allies, and endlessly curious neighbors. If you treat them well, they will treat you better." His expression grew serious. "But you should never, ever give them a reason to fear for those they love. Because Deathworlders do not know how to stop. They do not know how to give up. They do not know how to accept that something they care about is gone. He looked up at the stars, toward a distant blue world that most of the galaxy had once tried to ignore. They will cross the universe for their people. They will fight gods and monsters. They will burn everything in their path, and they will never ever stop until the job is done. His granddaughter was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked the question that every young being asked eventually. "Grandfather, do you think humans are good or bad?" Kethrix laughed softly. It was a question he had asked himself many times over the years, and he always came back to the same answer. "They are human, little one. They are everything at once. They are violent and gentle, terrifying and kind, destructive and creative. They contain all the best and worst possibilities of sentient life, mixed together in proportions that change from moment to moment." He patted her hand gently. "That is what makes them so dangerous, and that is what makes them so wonderful." In the distance, a human transport ship passed across the starfield, its running lights blinking in the darkness. It was a merchant vessel, probably carrying goods to a dozen different ports. There was nothing special about it, but Kethrix watched it until it disappeared from view, because somewhere on that ship there were humans. Strange, impossible, terrifying, wonderful humans. And the galaxy was never quite the same after they arrived. Fear.